11 seconds remaining. One last rush perhaps for the Flyers. Giroux to Hartnell. To Giroux. Giroux holds all the way across. Prager scores! 2.1 seconds remaining and the Flyers are on top.
Hey everybody, it's Isaiah, and I'm here with Chef B, who's going to tell us about one of our sponsors here. Chef?
Yeah, O&B Puckcast is now brought to you by Summit Public Adjusters. The winter months can be especially hard on our homes, from roof damage and peeling siding to frozen pipes and toilet overflows. Call Summit Public Adjusters before you call your insurance company. Dealing with your insurance company can be stressful and confusing. Let Summit Public Adjusters take the stress out of the claim process by having our guys work for you. Get the most for your money and your repairs. The next time the big snow or the rain leaves you with some home damage, contact us for a free consultation. Summit Public Adjusters are licensed in Pennsylvania and New Jersey. Learn more at summitpublicadjusters.com or call 215-752-0560. Just tell them that the chef sent you.
Yeah, what was that number again, Chef?
215-752-0560.
That's terrific. All right, we're going to carry on with the rest of our show. And we are back. It is Isaiah. Welcome to the O&B Puckcast, episode number 201. The Flyers have gone, 1-3 since we last spoke. They played some really good hockey, though. So it's a little frustrating. 4-4-1 as we get into the season. We're brought to you by FlyersNittyGritty.com. Before we bring on our guests, let's introduce the panel. Always to my left, I want to say hello to Chef B. What's the word, man?
Happy Halloween, everybody. Thank you. It's great to be here tonight. It's great to talk hockey because it's back and it's exciting. It's everywhere. Thank you.
Yeah, creepy, scary, Halloween. Yeah. And, of course, there's always the great Dan Silver. How are you, man?
I'm doing good. It's it's Halloween. It's getting a little chilly now, but everything's good. No complaints.
Great. So there's some storylines that have developed with our Philadelphia Flyers, and to discuss them and a lot more from the fourthperiod.com Stick to Hockey pod. He's got a gig with TSN. Oh, Anthony DiMarco. Where is that in Canada? Where's your gig? How you doing?
What's up, boys? So it's TSN 690 based out of Montreal. I've been working with them kind of on a weekly basis for over a year now at this point, but glad to be with you guys tonight. And happy Halloween. A cold one up here. I'm sure it's cold down there as well.
Yeah, well, you can't go from Tampa, Florida. I think we were like 70 tonight or 75. So, no complaints. It was 87 today, so it's a relative schwitz, as they say, compared to where you're at. That's for damn sure. So the Flyers, since we last recorded, lost a real heartbreaker to Vegas 3-2. And that's a game that's young mistakes created this situation, because the Flyers really gave a tremendous performance. And I don't know how many people stayed up. That was the the NHL face-off frenzy, or I always forget the name of it. What was that?
Yeah, and it was
Frozen Frenzy.
The Flyers game was right after the Phillies game, right?
Right. So it was kind of like a downer. And if you were seeking solace with the Flyers, they had you go in there for a little bit into that third period. And then, Cam York kind of made not the best decision and took a chance he didn't have to, with a point in their grasp. And it went the other way, and it ended up costing them. So, and hopefully the player will learn from that. He says he will, but they lost that one. And then there was some movement on the personnel front, Anthony, let me start with you. Talk to us about the decision behind demoting Emil Andrae, bringing up Belpedio and Mete, and at that point, Morgan Frost was still out.
Yeah, so I mean, they kept Emil Andrae up for what was it, the first 4 or 5 games, all obviously right through the West Coast trip, and I think that they wanted Andrae to get the feel for being around the big club. They wanted Andrae to kind of have that experience. Obviously, they do like the way he played for the most part in training camp, but I think it was apparent fairly early on here that Emil Andrae was not NHL ready. Like he just looked very overwhelmed. And the difference between the play of him and Zamula, who were rotating through the first several games there, was very stark. And, you had Zamula, who has now evolved into a top 4 staple, and Andrae, who's not even with the team. So he gets a few games. He goes on the road trip, gets the feel of the NHL. Now he goes down to the AHL to really play a big role. And I haven't tracked the Phantom since he's been down there, but I would imagine he's one of, if not the top defender down there, will be an all situations guy, presumably. They call up Belpedio and Victor Mete to kind of be the 6 and 7 in the injury absences of Mark Stahl and Rasmus Ristolainen, and the latter of which has not even played a game yet. So I think for all those involved, it makes a lot of sense that Andrae would go down, especially given the fact that he clearly was not ready for the NHL.
Yeah, I see that. Unfortunately, he sustained an injury. Dan, have you heard anything? I think I don't know if it was, he took a hit at the end of the first period.
He took a hit a couple of days ago from Berard, and he tried to get up, and then he couldn't get up, and he kind of collapsed back down to the ice. He left the game. It was early in the first period. He left the game. He didn't come back. I saw a couple of people today asking what's going on with Andrae. Someone asked Bill Meltzer. I didn't see him respond. I mean, it looked to me maybe a concussion type of thing. So pretty unfortunate that the first game that he gets sent down, he kind of gets smoked, and hopefully he's not out that long.
Yeah, that's kind of like a dirt sandwich. On top of being demoted, he takes a hit and sustains some type of injury. We can only guess. So, Chef, the next game the Flyers played, they really take it to the Wild, who had an off night. Bobby Brink gets his first 2 NHL goals. It was really a fun game against a quality team. Minnesota is a dark horse cup contender coming out of the West. And that was, out of all the games they played since we last recorded, that was the fun one to really watch.
Yeah, it was really nice to see Brink like getting comfortable. As you could tell, he was the first couple games there, he was sniffing. It was a couple of missed shots, and pucks that have fallen off his stick and all that. But it was nice to see kind of things start to click there. And about Andrae, I want to note something. I was at rookie camp, and I was at regular camp, and like what I noticed was, and what I wanted to see out of Andrae at that time was he didn't stand out. I expected him to be one of the people that would stand out, especially at the rookie camp. Kind of noticed him more, kind of like maybe somebody had said something to him, because he seemed to be more present during regular camp, and he did what he did. And I guess he got the look that made the impression to make the team, or get the look that Anthony was talking about. But I just was like, at that time, I thought he was going to be sent back down at the beginning. I didn't think he was going to make the team, but he kind of was like hit or miss there. But I just wanted to throw that in there. He didn't really stand out that much at the beginning, as much as somebody like Zamula did. So.
No, I can appreciate that. And Anthony, I wanted to call you in back, because the Flyers have a couple injuries right now, which kind of necessitated all of this activity. Because I think we would agree that Andrae might have gone down sooner, but with Rasmus Ristolainen and of course Mark Stahl out with, I think, what is a wrist injury or a rib injury, I think it is actually, for another, I guess, 5 weeks or so. There's obviously, there was some thinking behind not promoting some of the kids and bringing up guys like Mete and Belpedio.
Yeah, so I think Tortorella alluded to it that they didn't want to call up an Addard or a Ginning. And I do know that they spoke about Adam Ginning and it was a consideration, but they elect to go with the two more seasoned vets and guys who really are never going to be more than AHL, NHL tweeners at this point in time and probably for the duration of their career in Belpedio and Mete to kind of just play the roles of, make just like interchangeable pieces on that bottom pair. Belpedio, obviously a right shot that does help things out a bit as he can help Sealer move over to the left side. And I think Belpedio has been like okay, passable. I think Sealer hasn't been as good as he was last year. But what I have realized as opposed to last season was like last season, it felt like all three pairs on any given night could be more or less even. Like sometimes like York and Provorov would have a really good night. And then Sealer and Ristolainen, who on paper was like that third pair was probably their best pair for stretches at times. Then Sanheim and D'Angelo were a tire fire. Then they would get switched up and all that. But this season, I find that, okay, it's just 9 games in, but we see a clear-cut top 4. We see Sanheim and York and Zamula and Walker. And I think Walker has just completely separated himself from the pack as opposed to the other veteran defensemen they have on this team, with the exception of Sanheim. And I remember coming into the season, a lot of people were lumping Walker in with like Sealer and Mark Stahl. And I was saying like, hey, like this isn't just like an interchangeable like 6-7 defenseman. Like this guy can play. But I didn't even think that Sean Walker was going to be as effective as he's been, especially in terms of moving the puck up ice, jumping into the rush. And I've had people with the organization tell me that they've been shocked as to how well he's played and what he's meant as a veteran partner to a young defenseman in Igor Zamula.
Yeah, no, definitely. Walker has definitely caught a lot of people off guard with his play, and hey, hope he can keep it up. I still think he's a trade chip down the road, but we'll see how that works out. But Dan,
I mean, that's setting up to be a really interesting as the season goes on. Obviously, we'll see where the Flyers are, but I think everyone kind of assumed that Sean Walker would be a trade piece at the deadline. Now, if this team is, in playoff contention, who knows what's going to happen? Maybe they'll try and extend him. I mean, he has been really good so far, as Anthony mentioned. I mean, he's been good offensively. He's been good defensively. Had a really nice hit in the game yesterday or 2 days ago, depending on when people are listening to this. But really stepped up right outside the blue line. He's been really good, and as Anthony mentioned, he's been a calming influence for Zamula and very helpful. So that's going to be interesting to see what happens as the season goes on. But that's going to be the storyline all season, probably, depending on how this team is playing. Are they going to try and move some guys, or are they going to try and, gain some steam for a possible playoff push?
Wait, didn't DB when he was on our show think that the Flyers fans, didn't he give us a heads up saying that we would probably we could like Walker, that he gave us, I think, a heads up on that he could be somebody that this team could actually find as a nice little piece that moving forward. I could have thought might be something to look up. I'll have to look that up later.
I think he said something on social, because I don't think we've spoken to DB since that deal went down. I could be wrong, but yeah, I think I think it is something I did see on the app formerly known as Twitter. So Anthony, one of the things about the Flyers when they were playing well, even in some of these losses, right? Against Vegas, they played very well, and it just kind of didn't work out for them at the very end. And then they had just before that beat the Oilers and had a really great game. And when they lost to Dallas in a really tight game in overtime. So they were still playing well. A lot of it had to do with the structure, the stick positions, blocking passes, guys coming back, keeping your gaps small, the whole 9 yards. And then against the Ducks, it all went to hell in a 7-4 loss. They just came out not ready to play, and it looked like a game from last year. Even though they didn't give up, they were chasing a game all day.
Yeah, the Ducks game just seems like something that happens every time they play a matinee. It always seems that those games tend to get away from them, which is weird because I always like matinee games on a weekend. But, to your point, it got away from them early. I think the earliest part of it, and I believe Tortorella alluded to this in his post-game interview, was that like the score was not great, but they were playing decently. Like that first goal where Sanheim gave it away just inside the blue line, and then it was like a comedy of errors where like York slid like past like he slid like right into the crease, and then the Duck player fanned on the pass. I believe it was Henrique, and then that fan pass kind of threw everyone out of sorts. But I'm not going to lie at the feet of the goaltending, but I do find that game wouldn't have been as, I guess, unfortunately ended if it wasn't for Ersson. And that's not to say that Ersson was bad, but I just found like they didn't get one big save in that game. Like there wasn't one time where he made just a momentum stop. And I think about that. I think it was a power play goal. I forget what Duck player it was, but he got it and he came right to the top of the slot, and it was off of a turnover. So it's not like the players themselves on the Flyers are innocent, but it was kind of like a 3-on-2. Both passing lanes were covered, and he just beat Ersson clean on the blocker side from the high slot. And look, having that much time and space, easy enough for me to say, is nothing to, I guess, take for granted. Like that is a prime shooting opportunity, a prime scoring opportunity. But I just felt like the goaltending didn't really give them a chance to win, or like, the shorthanded breakaway goal after the Flyers cut the lead to 2 or 3 in the third period. And again, it's a breakaway. You can't lie that all on the goaltender. But I just felt like that game got away from them as much as it did because they didn't have a goalie that could bail them out even once, or not even necessarily bail them out, just give them one momentum save. Because Jamie McLennan on TSN always talks about this, a former NHL goaltender, is that sometimes it's just the timing of the saves. That just at certain points of the game, if you just come up with a big stop, it can change the entire way the game goes. And I just found the Flyers didn't get that once in that game.
No, I would agree with that. In fact, it looked a lot like a Felix Sandstrom game from last year, and that's a little rough on Ersson. Dan, in your opinion, is Ersson getting a raw deal from the Flyers in that they make him the designated backup, and with all the cloud and everything hanging over Carter Hart, it's like you got to really manage this situation. Felix Sandstrom gets sent down for a conditioning stint in Lehigh Valley. That means he could take up to 2 weeks getting back in shape. That's kind of working the rule book a little bit, and so he could get some work and get these two guys in a rhythm. What's your take on that whole situation?
And it is what it is. I mean, as long as Carter Hart is here, Ersson at best is probably going to be the backup. The Flyers' schedule has been such to this point that they haven't had a whole lot of back-to-back games. So Hart is obviously going to get the bulk of the starts. And it's sort of the job of the backup goaltender to be ready to go when he's called upon. Now, here's what I'll say is that this is Ersson's only his second year in the NHL. He didn't play a whole lot of games last season. So I'm not surprised that Ersson is sort of having a rough start to this season. Yeah, obviously the circumstances are not ideal, but it's sort of looking at the long game here. I mean, Ersson has a good body of work over in Sweden in the AHL. He was good last year. So it's kind of comical to me that a lot of people sort of want to give up on him after 2 rough starts this year. But it is the reality that, he's going to be the backup goaltender here as long as Carter Hart is here. He'll probably get into some more games as we start going through the season. The Flyers will have some more back-to-backs, and I'm sure he will start playing better. But again, I look at it as sort of, it is what it is, and it's his job ultimately to be ready to go in when called upon.
Yeah, I mean, he had 42 games in Lehigh Valley, so he only had 12 with the Flyers, but he did have a lot more work, and this is the adjustment, and this is what Tortorella was alluding to when he talked about the backup goaltender position. But I think it's a little bit more. There's a little more levels to that than Tortorella was referring to. Chef, do you have a word about that?
Yeah, I'm thinking it's at this point, it's going to come to be how much time and how much rhythm they can get in. There's going to be, this week coming up, it's going to be like four games in like 6-7 days or something. So it's a tight. So they're going to trade off a little bit here and there. And once the season really start going, I think you'll see him hit a better rhythm. I just think it's, we forget he's probably I think it's under 20 games. I don't think he's played 20 games yet in NHL. And I think a lot of time it's just getting used to the level of play that time, at the end of the year, like when he came up was playing at the end of the last year. I mean, I think you've made a good comparison. It's like September baseball if you're not a playoff team. So, I'm not saying that teams weren't trying, but I'm just saying that the level of play wasn't probably as comparable as you would if you were, seeing regular runs as a starter,
Yeah, well, sure. I mean, we see this with Emil Andrae. It was one thing to watch him stand out in exhibition games and all. And then when the level of play kicked up for regular season, he just wasn't the same player. He got hit a couple times. Guys are working harder. Everybody's out there trying to get off to a good start. And you separate the wheat from the chaff. But let's move on and let's talk about Morgan Frost. He gets into the game versus Carolina. We'll talk a little bit about that. I think the cream rose to the top in that game. And the Flyers I really hung in there. Some critical mistakes hurt them. But as the game wore on, they adjusted to the checking from Carolina, which is, one of 5 or 6 best teams in the entire league. And they're one of the favorites to come out in the Eastern Conference for a Stanley Cup. Anthony, I saw something from Kevin Kurz from The Athletic, the new Flyers writer, talking about how the Flyers are not shopping Morgan Frost. They still think that he's an important part of their future, that he's just going through a kind of phase. But there is this definite divide between how Tortorella thinks of him and Danny Briere and some of the others in the organization. How do you size all that up?
I think that the Flyers and Morgan Frost, I know, had a very contentious contract negotiation over the summer. And I think it got to a point where the Frost camp told the Flyers, like, hey, if you don't value the player, trade him. And obviously we know that had his issues with Tortorella last year, but he did have a very solid end of the season. He finished with 49 points or whatever it was. Mm-hmm. But I think that the Frost camp viewed Frost as one way and the Flyers viewed him as another way. And if I'm not mistaken, Frost was looking for, I believe, $3.5 million per. I think that's the contract that he was looking for, or his agent was. And the Flyers actually shopped him, or not shopped him, but like asked other teams like what they would give up for Morgan Frost. But there weren't any takers at that point in time, I guess, in regards to what the Flyers thought would be fair value because of the inconsistency in Frost's game. And I think nobody doubts that the talent is there, but I think that consistency has often been his biggest problem, Morgan Frost, and getting in his own head. And now you get to a point where I think the Flyers are not shopping him per se and still view him as a developing player. But I do know that the agent has started to make a lot of noise. And I do believe that the Frost camp hasn't been happy through all of this. And could it be that a lot of the bad blood from the negotiations has trickled down into the regular season? Maybe. Like, I was texting someone this morning that, like, because I think Frost, for the most part, had a pretty solid game last night. Not perfect, but I think he made a lot of creative moves down low and showed that he is a centerman on this team that is much different from the other 3 that they have at their disposal to play in the top 9 in Lawton, Couturier, and Noah Cates. But when I was texting this one person, they said that, maybe his agent can give us a break now, type of thing. So I think that this entire experience for Morgan Frost hasn't been pleasant, and his camp has made it known that they aren't happy. And I believe even Elliot Friedman alluded to it on the last 32 Thoughts, that they could have understood sitting 2 games or something, but they couldn't understand why sitting 5 was like acceptable. and that if this kept going and Frost wasn't getting consistent playing time, that he would be looking for a new home. But I think that there is blame on both sides. I do think that John Tortorella, as he's done with other players, has zeroed in on Frost way too severely at times and held different players to different standards, while some could do no wrong, while others were always in his crossfire. But I also do think that there is some blame on the players' side where, and I've heard this as well, is that Frost has a tendency to sulk. I don't know if Frost said it himself or one of the media members said it, that like his mom called him to check in on him during the time that he was sitting in the press box. Like, dude, you're in the NHL. Your mom doesn't need to check to see if your feelings are okay. Like, you need to be a bit more, tough than that. And I know that may sound a bit outdated or archaic, but like, that's just the fact of the matter. You're on a rebuilding team that has a lot of different young players at their disposal. So I don't think they're shopping him. I think Kevin is absolutely right on that, but I would not lock it in with 100% certainty that he is going to be part of this thing moving forward.
Yeah, Chef.
Anthony, I want to ask you specifically, okay? This whole Frost Forrester thing, because when we were talking about how he was going to crack this lineup, kudos to Isaiah, he called it perfectly. He thought that Lawton was going to have to drop down and Paling was going to be the one that was going to sit. But is it now, how much of it is because he was the leading, he tore it up at the last half of the season last year, Frost, give it to him. He stepped it up when he was asked, and he put it in, and maybe he thought he was riding that. But also in the preseason, he was a leading scorer too, and he had a fairly good preseason as well in camp. So my question would be this: how much of it that, and then you have Brink throwing a monkey in the wrench for everybody, how much of it was it the position of center versus wing that factored in, do you think, into the decision of, Forrester, who might not have been playing at the level that Frost was at the time, but I'm assuming that a lot of that decision was the fact that they, was a center versus a wingman.
Well, look, I came on here with Dan and Isaiah, I think over the summer, and I said that Frost had the inside track because he is a centerman on a team and an organization. It's not like they have like this budding top line center in the wings. Like, they really have no centermen that project to be like top 6 players, unless you count Cutter Gauthier, but the jury's still out on that. Like, their highest ranked centerman is probably Elliot Denvoyer, and he caps at what, like a 3C at very most. So I said that like Frost should be thinking that the 1C is up for grabs. And I think that last night we saw, as I already mentioned, that he could make plays down low that Couturier can't make, that Cates can't make, that Lawton can't make. Like, Dan has done a great job breaking down Frost's skill since he was in junior. And there's no doubt that he has amazing skill. And when he's down low and has a bit of time and space before the hash marks, that's when his talent really comes out. My read on it is that, and I've heard Tortorella say this or feel this way about other players, so this is me kind of tying 2 and 2 things together. I think that Tortorella's gripe with Frost is that he plays his best when nothing matters. Like in the preseason, in the back half of last season, when like there was nothing on the line, right? Where it was just kind of throwaway games. It had there was no massive circumstance or consequences if they won or lose. And then the first 2 games of this season, the second game, everyone played bad, but the first game they played well. They got a win in Columbus. And through the first 2 games, he was arguably their worst forward. Now, you can make the case for a lot of guys. Like, you could have taken this guy out or that guy out or this guy out. We talk about Forster and Brink. Like, I think Tyson Forster's actually been playing pretty well. I think he's just been snake bitten. I thought he was one of their best forwards last night. I think that entire line with Frost and Konechny was their best. And obviously Bobby Brink has had a really strong start going all the way back into training camp. So I do think center has a part to do with it, because the Flyers do have a desperate need for any young player that could project to be a top 6 player. And Tortorella has alluded to it, that if Frost is going to play, he's going to be in a scoring role. He is going to be a centerman. He's not going to move to the wing, as we saw AV use him back, 2-3 seasons ago. So there's a lot, I guess, at play with Morgan Frost. He's a very polarizing player for management and John Tortorella, clearly. But I do think that the Flyers should feel that they should give him more leeway. And I think that's where I think that the team is maybe making a bit of a mistake here, that he offers you something that no other player in your organization really offers you right now. But on the flip side, if you're Morgan Frost, you can't sulk. You have to make the most of your opportunities. And to his credit, and I had someone text me last night that he really competed last night. So he had a good game last night, and hopefully he could build off that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think I was actually the first person that predicted that instead of scratching one of Brink or Forster early in the season for game 3, I think I actually said after the second game, I will not be surprised if Morgan Frost is scratched and they put Lawton at one of the center spots. And that's exactly what Torts did, because he's completely predictable. Look, there's no beating around the bush. John Tortorella does not like Morgan Frost. This is not a secret, guys. Like, Danny Briere does like Morgan Frost. As I understand it, and from watching Keith Jones on broadcasts, I don't think he likes Morgan. I don't think he's a big fan of Morgan Frost either. So if you want to view this as John Tortorella against Danny Briere in the Frost camp, Tortorella in the non-Frost camp, I think Keith Jones sort of swayed the balance a little bit towards the anti-Frost take. Because if you look at the lineup last night with Lawton as the 4C and Frost on a scoring line, the fourth line, first of all, had a lot more scoring chances than they had in previous games, and they actually scored a goal, I believe, last night. I think their lineup is much better with Frost in the top 9 and Lawton centering that fourth line instead of Ryan Poehling, who's the guy that they just brought in to give a chance to, who looked good in the preseason, and Tortorella kind of fell in love with that fourth line. But they're clearly better with how the lineup was last night. We'll see what happens. I said all off season that I don't think Morgan Frost is going to be in this organization long term. And it's because I don't think John Tortorella is a big fan of his. And as we've talked about, and Anthony has mentioned, when Cutter Gauthier shows up, if he's going to play center, I don't see where the spot is for Morgan Frost, because of Couturier and Cates are always going to be higher up than Frost in Tortorella's sort of lineup. And if Gauthier is playing center, by the way, maybe we'll talk about Cutter Gauthier later, but he's a guy that I think John Tortorella is going to have some issues with, is my guess. But anyway, we can get to that. But I just think it's as simple as, and I've been a big Morgan Frost fan. I think he brings some things to the lineup that really Bobby Brink's the only other guy that sort of brought. Like, there was a shift late in the game last night where Frost had a really nice pass from the corner out front, where they just missed a scoring opportunity. And then he had another really nice pass on the same shift. Like, he does things that other guys on this team can't do. But it was very telling when during the preseason and early in the season, John Tortorella is saying that, well, Bobby Brink brings something to this team that nobody else does with his playmaking. That's kind of the same thing that Frost can do. Brink has been better than Frost. Brink has been really good this season. But I think it comes down to the fact that John Tortorella is not a big fan of Morgan Frost. Like, whether or not you think that Frost deserves to be in the long-term plans, I don't think he's going to be because of the coach, is my opinion.
Well, I think the difference between Frost and Brink has been that Brink has been a little bit better operating in tight spaces. He seems to not throw the puck away. It seems to be able to make plays and exhibit superior vision and calm under duress, where Frost can really deteriorate in traffic. And that is something that has been disappointing in terms of what he hasn't progressed in that way. I think when you watch a game and watching Frost last night, it just really was, to me, it was a dud the first half of the game. And but I wasn't being judgmental. The guy hadn't played in 6 games. There's pressure on him. And he had 2 bad games to start the season. And then you saw, like Dan was pointing out, that, you saw that skill coming to the fore. And it wasn't like Carolina was backing off. In fact, they were kind of ratcheting things up, and he rose to the occasion. He's a frustrating player. And it was like Anthony said, we don't know if we really have a center. And Gauthier, it's kind of, it's iffy, so that was a tough game last night. And it really got killed at the faceoff dot. They lost 71% of their face-offs. So it's pretty rare because Couturier usually does a much better job, and they have some pretty decent face-off men, but they had it. The whole team got smoked. That's where the Flyers are at right now. And Anthony, just anything going on, any hot stove information that you might want to share with the O&B audience tonight before we let you go?
Well, the only thing I would maybe talk, and this is very premature, but I have started like poking around on Owen Tippett and what his next contract may look like. And the best of my knowledge is the Flyers and Tippett have not started discussing it. But I think that if I'm not mistaken, he's like their only significant pending free agent, RFA or UFA. I think all other guys are more or less just like, bought like, no, I don't want to say bottom barrel. Like I want to be respectful, but the only
Carter Hart.
significant. Oh yeah, Carter Hart. There you go. He has a big, but it's weird. Carter Hart, I haven't even started thinking about because of the Hockey Canada stuff, but that kind of seems to have been like put on the back burner a bit. But anyway, to concentrate on Tippett, I have started asking around about what the Flyers could be looking for and what the Tippett camp could be looking for. And my initial comparison that I went to in terms of a contract, because I do know the Flyers do view him as a long-term member of this team. I don't think that's a secret. Obviously has been one of John Tortorella's favorite players going back to last season. So it will be a longer-term contract. So the player that I zeroed in on was Brandon Hagel's deal, who got 8 years at $6.5 million. I asked someone with the Flyers about that a few weeks ago. They said they thought that was a little rich. I think the Flyers are probably going to try and get him somewhere in the high fives, like maybe somewhere that Travis Konechny type of AAV of 5.5. But I think that the Owen Tippett camp might start asking in the low sevens. So that is something that I think will be interesting to see how things play out and where things ultimately land on that contract and the AAV. And again, they haven't even started talking yet. It is far from like I said, it hasn't even started the negotiations, but I do wonder where the ultimate AAV will land. And the one that I kind of landed on, because the Hagel one was where I started, was maybe the Nichushkin contract. And I think he got 6.1 over 7 years. So obviously will depend how Tippett scores this year, how many goals, if he cracks 30. I think last year he had 28, if I'm not mistaken. So I would wonder if he's going to come in somewhere in that $6 to $6.5 million AAV range on like a 6 to 8 year contract.
Interesting. Just by way of comparison, 81 games for Brandon Hagel, 30 goals, 34 apples, 64 points. And that seems to be about the range, like you were saying, of Tippett, who got 27 or 28. I forget what it was last year. But this is a big year for him. He's an arbitration eligible or RFA. So
yeah, and he doesn't seem like the type of guy that they're going to squeeze, right? And I don't think Tippett's the type of guy, or no, not to act like I know the guy personally, but it just, I don't think that he would be the type of player to try and, get paid like a top line player. I think he is really settling in as like that secondary left wing. Obviously, the fact that he's been able to adapt to the left side has made him more versatile, which may make him more valuable. The cap is going to start going up over the next several years. I think they project it to go up to 87.5 for next season. So maybe that does get him into that Brandon Hagel range, even though he hasn't quite hit that point total yet. So, I mean, anywhere from $6 to $6.5 million. If you look at Hagel, if you look at Nichushkin's contract, obviously will depend how long-term they go. It will also depend on what the player wants. Maybe the player wants something more shorter term, so he gets another crack at UFA, or he gets at least one crack at UFA in his late 20s, in which case maybe the AAV is lower. But if the player wants to go longer term, which I believe the team would like to go, then maybe you're looking at that $6 to $6.5 million range, unless he explodes this season and warrants something maybe in the higher sixes and low sevens.
Interesting. Great stuff. Anthony, where can people find your work and what you got coming up?
Yeah, so you can find my work at thefourthperiod.com. I actually had an interview with Travis Sanheim today, which also includes a quote from Flyers president of Hockey Ops, Keith Jones, to really break down Sanheim's start to the season, talk about the new contract and whatnot. That should be up on thefourthperiod.com Thursday morning. And then I've been doing a lot more league-wide stuff. I interviewed Bill Armstrong last week of the Coyotes, Doug Armstrong a few weeks ago, Bill Guerin before the season started. I think I might be setting something up with the Kraken GM, Ron Francis, somewhere down the line later in November. So more league-wide stuff, but still trying to bring some good Flyers content as well.
Fantastic. Anthony, thanks so much for stopping by.
Thanks,
No
Sam.
problem, guys. Thanks for having me. Have a good one.
You too.
All right. Take care. Okay, so gents, before we get rolling into the next Flyers topic, I just wanted to take this opportunity to send an O&B condolences out to the family of Adam Johnson. A terrible tragedy in the EIHL, the English Professional Hockey League, kind of like a Clint Malarchuk or Richard Zegnick skate to the neck incident, but he perished as a result overseas. There's been a lot of discussion as a result about neck protection and Kevlar and wrist protection. And, it's just a tragic thing. He played with the Penguins. And of course, in 21-22, he played 30 games with the Lehigh Valley Phantoms. So it stung that much more from a local angle. So just our condolences to his family, and we'll see what happens with the league and how they respond. Dan, do you have any thoughts?
Just a horrible, thing to happen. It just there's not much you can say. Just condolences to everyone in his family, everyone involved, and it was just an very upsetting situation. And hopefully, they'll end up mandating the neck guards, even if it saves one life, in the future, 20 years down the road that would have ended due to playing hockey. They're not really an arduous thing to wear. So hopefully that'll get mandated. It's a dangerous sport, but the last thing people should worry about is losing their lives while playing hockey. So it seemed like a really nice young man, so just very sad situation.
Yep. So Adam Johnson dead at age 29. Okay, gents, want to move on. We talked about Morgan Frost earlier, and I think there's some lessons we could learn listening to Torts and what he wants out of Morgan Frost, and what prospectively could be some issues that, Dan, you alluded to with regard to Cutter Gauthier, who, by the way, in 6 games, he has 6 goals and an assist for 7 points at Boston College. And you combine that with guys like Ryan Leonard and
Will Smith,
Gabriel Perreault and Will Smith. That's quite a lineup to have there. But,
Boston College. I've watched a couple of their games.
Yeah,
they're an exciting team. There's a number of really exciting college teams this year with a lot of really good young NHL prospects on them. Michigan State's a fun team. Minnesota's a fun team. Boston with Macklin Celebrini having such a great season. Unfortunately, it doesn't look like the Flyers are going to be quite bad enough to have a legitimate shot to land Macklin Celebrini, but he's been really good so far for Boston. Cutter Gauthier is a shot machine. The guy takes 8 to 10 shots a game. I've compared his physical stature as sort of like an Eric Lindros in terms of his build and his skating ability, but the physicality is not really there. And as you can tell, with his only 1 assist, he hasn't really been setting up a lot of goals. He's kind of like an up and down winger, great speed, who just takes a ton of shots. He doesn't engage that much physically in the play. And I think that's a thing that maybe John Tortorella is going to have to work with him on. I also wonder if I've never met him. He seems like he's got a rather high opinion of himself and his hockey ability, which, listen, you have to have that, right, to be as good, as a player as he is. it just seems like he's maybe a little more outwardly confident, which I don't know if it'll start rubbing some guys the wrong way as he goes up levels. Maybe I'm getting a wrong read on his personality, but that's kind of like what I get the sense from. I just get the sense that John Tortorella is kind of going to have some things to say about Cutter when he joins the league. I do think watching him play that I think he is built to be an NHL center. I mean, I think that he's got a little bit of Jeff Carter in him. The way he's kind of north-south, really good skater, shoots the puck. But we'll see how the season progresses. I think he is a Hobey Baker candidate at this point. But you'd like to see a little bit more playmaking out of what he's doing. We'll see. He's going to score a ton of goals. He's going to be a first or second line NHL player for sure. He's a very exciting prospect. But I just think there's going to be some growing pains with him coming into the NHL.
Dan, I got a question. For Cutter, I've only seen the one game. What do you see as a center? He's going to have to assume some pretty good defensive responsibilities too, and that's what we've seen. It's kind of been lacking on this Flyers, I guess, group of centers the last couple of years. I haven't seen enough of them to make any kind of judgment on his defensive skills. What have you seen if you've seen a couple games?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say he's a strong defensive player at this point. He's back checks a little bit. I think Ryan Leonard is already sort of shown to be sort of a better defensive play forward at this point. It's something he's going to have to work on, right? Noah Cates' defensive play is one of the reasons that John Tortorella is such a big fan of his. Cutter Gauthier obviously is a really good defensive center. So I think that to be considered a top two-line center in Torts' system, you've got to be strong in your own zone. And I think Cutter's got all the tools for it. He's got the size, he's got the strength, he's got the skating ability. So I'm kind of looking forward to seeing how Tortorella molds him. There was a really funny clip today I don't know if you guys saw it on Spit and Chicklets, where they had Logan Cooley on, the really talented young center for Arizona, who was drafted third the year that the Flyers took Cutter Gauthier fifth. And they were saying, Logan, did you know you were going to go to Arizona? And he said, well, yeah, I had some good interviews with them. And then he said, but 20 minutes before the draft, I got a call from the Flyers and they told me they were trying to move up to draft me, which was kind of interesting. And then they kind of had a chuckle about it. And then I think it was Ryan Whitney, who said, if you were at the Flyers, John Tortorella would be walking you around in a dog collar right now, which was the way he said it was just absolutely hilarious. And everyone started laughing. But, I kind of feel like that's what it's going to be like for Cutter Gauthier when he joins the Flyers.
Here's what I'm thinking. I don't see him as a center at all right now. In fact, I would think if they really want to make him a center, he's going to have to go down to the AHL. And I want you to envision this. This guy right now, he goes back to BC. He's the BMOC, the big man on campus. And I think this kind of feeds into what Dan was talking about his confidence and things like that. And I remember thinking he should definitely go back to school. He'll play another year at the WJC. And I'm starting to think I was wrong. I'm starting to think he would have been better off in the AHL if they wanted to make him a center, developing the kind of habits, like his body position, his battling on the boards, his stick position, blocking, passing, and shooting lanes defensively, working on his playmaking, getting his teammates involved. Look, he's always going to be more of a Cy Young as a forward. He's always going to have many more goals than assists. And there's guys like that. There's plenty of good shooting centers. Matthews, although he's all around very good. And Jeff Carter, like Dan had mentioned. But he's going to expand his game because what he's doing right now, I could see him coming into the league and being like Mike Hoffman. He's at the right circle on his off wing, and he's getting that shot off. It's an NHL shot now, and the speed with which he gets it off, that's NHL quality, in my humble opinion. But he's not going to get as many of those looks 5-on-5. And I don't see him in all these tremendous board battles working his butt off. And I think he's going to have to learn to score in different ways if he wants to take his game to another level. And defensively, he's just not there. He may end up being a kind of guy who comparable. I don't know about level of play, but like John LeClair was a pretty good NHL center. But when he moved the left wing, even when Lindros was out, he was a stud and a Hall of Fame level performer. And I think right now the Flyers are going to have some decisions to make, whether they want to put maybe a bit of a round peg in a square hole and force him into the middle, or at least just try him there and see what happens. Because right now he's not a 200-foot player, and if they're complaining about Frost and some of those qualities are missing, Cutter Gauthier is less of a playmaker, although I definitely think Cutter Gauthier is going to come into the league and score goals. So he'll towards for whatever faults Cutter has, I think he's going to like that right away, just like he liked it with what's his name, Forster.
Yeah. I mean, well, and this sort of fits into when I talk about his confidence level. Like, I'm pretty sure from what I've heard that Cutter Gauthier wanted to turn pro last year, but I don't think he wanted to go to the Phantoms. I don't think Cutter Gauthier thinks that he deserves to spend any time in the AHL. Like, I think he wanted to go pro last year because he wanted to be with the Flyers. If he comes in and I think the Flyers, part of it was they convinced him to go back to school for another year. If he turns pro next year and John Tortorella is hard on him and they end up sending him down to the Phantoms, that's where I think that his ego is going to kind of have to really take a kind of a back seat. And I don't know from what I've seen if he's going to be able to do that. So that's where I think it's going to be kind of interesting, is if he comes in, Torts is hard on him, they send him to the AHL, I'm not sure how he's going to react to that. So that's the kind of stuff that with Cutter, I think is going to have to be a little bit of a learning curve. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't get the vibes that he's going to be a guy who's going to be very happy if he ends up in the AHL next year.
This is my concern. You articulated it so well. And I don't think we're pulling something out of our ear. We're just, remember, we're the podcast where we've watched the game 30, 40, and 50 plus years now. It's not, we've seen players like him come and go. This is a really talented kid. There's every reason to be excited about his goal-scoring ability. And we also have to remember that John Tortorella is not going to be here forever. So as time goes on and he gets further into his contract, his word will have less weight, in my humble opinion. And they may be ready when Cutter is here and Mishkov is here to get a different kind of coach to take them to another level. Because John Tortorella is not going to coach his team to a Stanley Cup. So Briere and Jones have to keep that part of it in mind too. You get a guy like a young Laviolette who's willing to play a high risk, high reward style. And Laviolette's been in a couple finals, won a Stanley Cup. So you got to keep that in mind as well, Chef.
Yeah, well, it's a lot of people call him a dinosaur, an old school way of playing. I think he's evolved a little bit more than that. I think he integrates. There's no doubt that his teams are one of the most fit, in shape teams in the whole league. They're there. It's, I guess sometimes, it's the way he drives home his point might be off-putting to some people. And who knows? Yeah, I mean, he could be the guy that gets you to that point, but then will never get you past that point. How can I explain this? Like a Donovan McNabb, almost. Like, as a football player, he was a very good quarterback. He was never. I don't think you were ever going to win with him. You needed to go to the next level, and you have to make changes like that. That's the first thing that popped in my head. Sorry, it's the wrong sport, but that's what I'm alluding to.
You're talking about like Tortorella and his ability. I mean, look, he won a cup, and he took teams took the Rangers to the point where AV took his players and they needed a change, and they went to a final where they lost to the Kings. I think that was 2014. So no, I mean, listen, he gets the most out of his teams. It's just that with the timeline of this team and his contract and his age, I see him moving into a front office position before, things work out for the Flyers as a cup contender. That's all, so a lot of it's timing. And this is part of what Briere and Jones have to massage. This kid, is really important, and Mishkov as well. And Mishkov is not exactly, as he matures, and I'm sure it'll be better. But it's been tough for him. And then you throw in the whole thing with his father and everything he's been through. So it's not easy. Look, they're human beings. They're not widgets. And all the statistics in the world and numbers, it doesn't mean anything if somebody's not happy and wants to go somewhere else. And we see this with a very talented player like Pierre-Luc Dubois. That's a guy who, if he played it to an optimum, he'd probably be in the top half of the first line centers in the league. If he, without all the other factors.
Stuff.
Yeah, extraneous stuff. Exactly. Okay. So listen, I think we're going to wrap it there. The Flyers play tomorrow night against Buffalo at the Wells Fargo Center. And then on Friday, they're in Buffalo. And Saturday, they welcome the LA Kings. And after that, they play San Jose out west. And they start a little swing with the Sharks and the Ducks. They get to see them again, maybe get some revenge. And then they play the Kings. And we'll probably be in there saying hello to you at some time in there. So, Dan, I'm going to turn to you to get some final thoughts.
The Flyers have been pretty good this season. I was looking at Hockey Reference has a stat that they call simple rating system, where it basically looks at goal differential and strength of opponents. The Flyers are actually 12th in the entire NHL based on that rating system, and I think they're 5th in the Eastern Conference. So I've been pleasantly surprised by how well the Flyers have played this year. And I'm kind of interested to see how it moves along. And I want to see if Bobby Brink can keep this up. He's got, I think, more points than Adam Fantilli and the same amount of points as Connor Bedard. So there's a lot of fun things this season that I'm enjoying watching. I do have a work trip coming up. I leave on Sunday. I'm going over to Asia for 3 weeks. So I'm going to be out of commission for the next 2.5 weeks. I'll try and find some Flyers bars in Hong Kong and Korea and Singapore. So we'll see if I can make that happen. But I'm going to be a little bit out of commission for the next month or so.
Well, don't forget onhockey.tv. You can check that out.
It always blows up my computer with like spam and stuff like that. So,
oh, really?
I think I can use a VPN with ESPN Plus, I think is what I can do.
There you go.
Okay.
Yeah.
Check that out. Great. And they can follow you on Twitter at DSilver88.
Yeah, folks can find me on Twitter at DSilver88.
Fantastic. Chef.
Yeah, it's going to be a fun season, regardless of what's happening. You see what we got. The games, if nothing else, they have not been boring. They've not been out of a lot of games either. They've hung in there. So it's going to be fun in that respect. You are going to get your money's worth if you go and buy a ticket. It wasn't like last year where it was a 50-50 chance whether or not you're actually going to be entertained at all. And I'm not talking about gritty and alligators, support alligators or whatever you're talking about. I'm talking about the actual product on the ice. So I think you'll be pleasantly surprised about what you see from this team. So, and you can reach me at Chef to the left B on Twitter, Chef to the left B.
Fantastic. And you can follow the O&B Puckcast at O&B Puck, at O&B Puck on the app formerly known as Twitter. We also have a backup plan with Getter at O&B Puckcast, at O&B Puckcast. And of course, if you follow us on one of our dozen podcast platforms, please subscribe, follow, whatever applies. Apple, Spotify, iHeart, TuneIn, Amazon Audible, Google, many others. And of course, we have a YouTube page. Just plug in there, O&B Puckcast will come right up. We have a Facebook page. And we really do appreciate if you would subscribe or follow, because it moves us up the charts when people are looking for Philadelphia Flyer podcasts, which we are one. And we thank you so much as we complete our 201st episode. We wouldn't be here without you. So until next time, everybody, take care.